Remember Jurassic Park? Remember how the dinosaurs tried to kill everybody? Cloning probably won't kill us like that, but it does kill a lot of animals. That's the reason there's this huge ethical debate that surrounds cloning. There's a lot of good reasons why a lot of people are against it. So let's run over some facts about cloning and what it is. Cloning is a subject that has piqued human interest for a long time. It started in the 40s cloning frogs, and now all sorts of animals can be cloned, whether it be cats, dogs, sheep, anything really. So what is cloning? Cloning is pretty complicated, but in short, you take cells from the original animal, say your original dog, and you implant that into the donated egg cells from another unrelated dog, female. And so you cultivate the embryo in a lab and then implant it into a surrogate mother. And then, theoretically, that animal gets born, and there's no complications for it or the mother. Unfortunately, that seldom happens, and there's all kinds of complications for either the clone or the mother. The debate stems from all those complications, and if it's worth it. So a non-profit based in the UK called Understanding Animal Research has a pretty good article about cloning and has a very good section about Dolly the sheep. So you might remember Dolly from the 90s, or at least heard about her. Dolly was one of the first animals that was internationally publicized about the success of cloning. She really kick-started the whole thing about it. The thing that really wasn't that well known about Dolly is Dolly was actually the 276th attempt in that experiment. And even with those 276 attempts, only 29 embryos were actually made, and only about 13 of those made it to surrogates. Dolly was the only successful attempt. Dolly eventually even died at age 6, which is about half the lifespan of a sheep because they usually live to be around 12. Another article from Smithsonian Magazine tells the story of a veterinary professor whose name I'm going to absolutely butcher, is Chae-Myung Jae Ko, who teaches at the University of Illinois. One day, while he was working, a man called and asked if it was possible to clone his dog. Ultimately, they would have been able to, and they even drove an hour and back to get the cells from the rapidly decomposing dog, and they concluded that they could have, but the man ultimately backed out because it was too expensive. Ko was a good scientist to do this because he had experience. He had actually advised a team of scientists in 2005 that successfully cloned 2 dogs. Unfortunately, the first one died of pneumonia when it was very young, but the second one actually lived a very good life until it died at the age of 10. Sounds like it went fairly well, right? Well, it sounds like that, but it really didn't. So the dog's name that survived 10 years was Snuppy, and Snuppy and his twin were 2 of 3 successful pregnancies after more than 1,000 embryos were planted. After 1,000 embryos that were implanted into 123 mothers. 3 of them survived. And when I say 3 of them survived, only 1 of them really lived that long, and the other 2 died early. So there's several grievances with cloning and problems with it and just in general. I'm going to run over a few of those. Number 1 would be the welfare of the clones. Like I said, if it's dying young or it's dying of very unfortunate complications, a lot of people would argue it's not really worth it. As demonstrated by the Dolly and Snuppy experiments, a very large portion of the animals don't even make it to birth, and even the ones that do end up dying. Interesting fact about Dolly, her DNA was actually shorter than regular sheep, and that may have caused a lot of complications. Unfortunately, Dolly did only live to be 6, which is half the lifespan of a normal sheep, like I said. Dolly died of arthritis in one of her back legs, as long as a very, very large tumor that grew in her lung. Snuppy died of the same cancer that killed his father, or I say father, his original, when it was 12. Many of the surrogates do not survive the process either and can die in childbirth or from complications or any manner of complications. Cloning also requires a large amount of surrogates. Like I said, there were over 100 surrogates for Dolly, and there were plenty for those dogs too. This has raised the question, would this create these dog farms to create all these surrogates for these clones? Then say you have all these dogs. Once they fulfill their purpose of birthing clones, what happens to the dogs? Do you just cut them loose into the wild You let them roam the street. It's a lot easier said than done to find hundreds and hundreds of homes for these dogs that were raised in labs. A paper from the United States National Library of Medicine that was written by 4 Canadian scientists ultimately stated, "Theriogenologists and veterinary clinicians need to better understand the medical problems associated with cloning animals in order to develop more effective treatments to reduce pregnancy loss and neonatal morbidity and mortality levels." Basically, that means we really need to figure out how to do this before we can really start pushing it into the mainstream and making this a common occurrence, if we even should. So ultimately, there are 3 schools of thought on cloning. There's, yeah, it's okay, we can do it, we can learn how to do it, and we can keep doing it. There's no, it's not okay, there's too many deaths and just unfortunate situations that surround it for all these dogs or mothers and all the clones. And then finally, there's the maybe. We need to study more and we need to practice more before we can really start considering, should we do this? Personally, I think cloning should not be continued. While therapeutic cloning is a good thing and it can create these stem cells that can help people, that's a whole different issue that would need another 2 or 3 speeches to really establish what it is and how it works. As for just straight on, just cloning animals and making an exact copy, I'm personally against it. I hope I've informed you and you can make a decision based off of that and continue to do research on your own. Thanks.